So, to begin with, let me apologize. I do not intend for this channel to just be about politics and ranting, but the events of the last couple of days in South America have really put a lot of things on my chest that I'd like to get off. And for that reason, I've decided to make this little video. So just know that this is hopefully a one-off, but thank you very much for listening, anyone who does. I'd like to begin by stating that frankly, the military adventurism that we've seen in the last couple of days is nothing new for U.S. foreign policy. They did very similar things all throughout the Cold War, very often with just as flimsy a justification. All it would take is for the President of the United States to assert that the leader of whatever country it was a communist and Soviet-aligned, and that would get the red mist to descend on the population, and they would demand that the country the U.S. military invade and or bomb whatever country it was. The doctrine that justified all of this military adventurism was called domino theory, which equated every country on the earth to a domino, and imagined that if any country was allowed to adopt what the U.S. government decided was communism as their form of government, eventually every country on the earth would adopt communism as their form of government, or to put it rather more succinctly, as the theme song to Full Metal Jacket said, "We must save freedom now at any cost, or someday our own freedom will be lost." And it was a doctrine that worked. For the entirety of the 70 or so odd years of the Cold War, all that the United States would need to do if it wanted to effect regime change in a country is assert that the leader of whichever country it was a communist, and immediately the red mist would descend on the population, and they would light up the switchboard of the Senate and the House and even the White House and demand that whatever country it was be invaded and or bombed and that leader ousted. But of course, that's only the most recent justification for this sort of thing. We can find examples of this same sort of military adventurism going back to the early 20th century with the so-called Banana Wars and the Panamanian Independence War, which led to the building of the Panama Canal. I digress, that's in the past. What we're interested in here is the recent history of the US and Venezuela, and that starts in the early 2000s with the ascension of Hugo Chavez to presidency of the Republic of Venezuela. The people of Venezuela, Chavez was generally considered to be a good guy. They saw their standard of living increase and prices went down. But to the United States, Chavez had committed the cardinal sin. He nationalized the oil industry, which robbed profits from the U.S. oil companies that were operating in Venezuela, also seizing their assets. This course of action greatly offended the then President of the United States, one George W. Bush, who allegedly contemplated all forms of military action up to and including the assassination by the CIA of President Chavez. And so in support of this, the same old justifications were trundled out. They accused Chavez of being a socialist, a communist, and a Russian plant. But for whatever reason, those same old justifications did not work. The American public was willing to adopt a live and let live policy. And for whatever reason, George W. Bush was not willing to act unilaterally, either because he realized that that would be a frankly ludicrous and potentially dangerous course of action, or because he actually valued public opinion. But this is where things start to get really complicated. Chavez had the temerity to die of natural causes while in office, and he was replaced by his vice president, one Nicolas Maduro. And Maduro lacked any of the charisma or administrative skills of his predecessor. But you don't need to take my word for that. Last Week Tonight has done a whole segment on the recent history of Venezuela, which includes a fair amount about President Maduro, including allegations that he received orders from a reincarnated President Chavez in the form of a very talkative parrot. The segment goes on to discuss the so-called Maduro diet and the Oedipal relationship that Maduro has with his mother. all of which is a very long-winded way of saying that Nicolas Maduro was not a very good president, and seeing him gone is something that might be welcomed by the Venezuelan people. As arguably positive as the ouster of Maduro is for the people of Venezuela, it does leave open a couple of questions. The first among them is, who's going to be in charge of the country now? While one would assume that it's going to be the vice president, simply moving into the office of president, the Trump regime has alleged that they're going to run the country as a puppet, which is frankly nothing new for the US government. They did it all throughout the Cold War. For an example, look at the Republic of Vietnam, also known as South Vietnam. The next question that we're going to ask is, why was it so easy? And this is a question posed by retired naval officer Malcolm Nance. According to him, the entire operation to extract Maduro took less time than it would to watch an episode of a television series, or approximately 30 minutes. The answer to this question has potentially far-reaching geopolitical implications. Again, according to Nance, the People's Republic of China, Russian Federation, and Cuba are all heavily invested in Venezuela, and now they've just been told by the United States government to get out. And so far they have said not a word. So what were they promised for their silence? We don't know yet. It is believed by some sources that the People's Republic of China was promised Africa, Russia was given Europe, and in return the United States would get essentially all of the Western Hemisphere as its sphere of influence, creating a tripolar world, which is actually nothing new. It's essentially the same policy that was used by the British Empire during the 19th century to secure world peace. However, that might not be the case this time around, and that might have worked for the British Empire in the 19th and early 20th century. But now the situation is very different. We have the extenuating circumstances of sea level rise, global climate change, and resource scarcity. Viewed in that context, and we certainly have no reason to doubt that the Trump regime doesn't view it in that context, the actions in Venezuela sound less like a recipe for world peace than they do the first moves of the Third World War. So thanks very much for letting me get all this stuff off my chest, and until the next video, whenever that is, go out and have the day that you all deserve. Sorry, one final point that I want to make, and that is, do I believe that the Trump regime just traded Taiwan for Venezuela? Honestly, I don't. That deal would be far too one-sided in China's favor, and even the Trump regime understands the value of Taiwan to U.S. foreign policy, and they aren't going to do that.